for project delivery. So, Martin, I'm going to hand over to you now, and let's see what you're going to share for us.
Thanks, Mick. If anyone can't hear, then please put your hand up and someone will try and sort that out. Look, thanks for the opportunity. So this is the Lean Construction Institute, and I'm not really focusing on Lean today. I'm focusing on whole of project delivery, and Lean has an important part in that, and that's what I want to do, bring some perspective to this conversation. I want to start, that's interesting. I want to start with a question. So we see a great diversity of outcomes on large projects and on small projects as well. So why is it that some projects achieve remarkable outcomes and other projects suffer? And some clients basically get more value out of their projects than other people do. In looking at this question over the years, I've come across a couple of paradoxes which I found really intriguing. The first one, the productivity paradox, I've called it. About 5 years ago, DPR, a big American company, had done some work. They developed a new quality system with their supply chain. And I was doing some work with them, and we published a paper basically showing that projects that were using this new quality system, which was developed collaboratively with their supply chain, they actually made more money, they went faster, and the quality improved. Now, I don't know if you all had this in your education, but the quality triangle used to say, well, you can optimize any two, but not all three. Another project that I worked on, one of my sort of later research projects, it was with 18 companies collaboratively looking at the causes of rework within projects. So we're looking at why there's all this rework at the end of projects. We looked at some 3,000 items of rework. That's a lot. On $60 million worth of work on 3 different projects. And we actually interrogated the people who did the work in every one of those cases. This went quite a while. And it was quite interesting. We said to them, now look, how come this wasn't solved when the work was being done? Why was this pushed to the back of the project? And there's just one answer. We were told to run faster. Now, there's a researcher about 50 years ago who came up with the idea and socialised that widely, that management get what they ask for. And we've all sat in rooms, in meetings, where basically we see the conversation is about speed and cost. But what we know now, and what we need to learn somehow, is that if we focus on reliability, we can go faster and make more money. So reliability is the gold standard. That's what we've got to try and achieve. And yet, in spite of that, on most projects around the world today, the conversation is about speed and cost. The other paradox is what I've called the certainty paradox, right? Clients basically, they seek certainty of outcome and they procure large complex projects through contract because they believe they're getting the best outcome, the best value for their money by locking the supply chain into a fixed price contract. So they're pushing the risk out the door, basically. That's all they're doing. But they believe that that's the best way to go. And you'll see in this presentation today, and this information is out in the public domain, that really risk is best managed collectively by everybody. In fact, I've written a couple of books and there's quite a few case studies in them, and one of them was with Sutter Health, and I'm going to talk about them later. Sutter's Health said to me, the next project that we deliver has got to be with a cooperative where everybody is working together. We don't want anyone to distort the project aims towards their own self-interest. We want everyone to focus on best for project. So that tells you the way major clients are thinking. And so we know that better risk management is achieved through the whole team working together. And yet clients, most of them in the world today, they want a fixed price contract. They want to push the risk out the door. And what that means is that if you've got 100 parties in the supply chain, there's 100 different organisations trying to manage their own contingency, manage their own profit. And so their focus is on their outcome rather than the best for the whole project. And we know that if that's put collectively, it's better managed. So these are paradoxes, and they both have a similar foundation. It's I guess the frailty of humans to seek certainty. I remember hearing conversations about quality, and people just couldn't understand this whole argument about quality and the focus on quality. And yet, it makes common sense that if you do something once and do it right, then you've got the best outcome. So what I guess just in the room or in the group that we have, and I guess you're all over the place. Just tell me, we're talking about major projects, complexity. What percentage of projects do you think major projects finish on time and on cost? What would you put that number at? If you put your hand up, then we'll unlock your mic and we'll hear what you've got to say, or we'll put it into the chat and someone will read
What's
it
your
out.
definition of a major project?
Well, look, let's say over $100 million, a supply chain of 50 or more parties doing the project, something like that. Any suggestions? Are we talking about 20%, 40%, 60%, 90%?
I'd say 30%.
Okay, 30. Do we have any other bids?
Depends on which program we're going off, right?
Well, it can be infrastructure, or it can be a complex building like a hospital, or a major commercial development. So I've got a few numbers there, and I'm having trouble keeping track of them, but I've seen 30. Nick, can you tell me what else has been put up there?
Yeah, so we've got 3 of 33 in the last 30 years. That's 3, I guess, major projects finish on time under budget out of 33 in the last 30 years. We've got 30% meet time and cost. And I guess that 3 of 33, that's coming from data from the Grattan Institute.
Right.
That's all we've got in the chat at the moment.
Okay. Well, look, that 3 out of 33 is 10%. So we got 10% and 33%. I have some data that I'm going to share with you, and it comes out of a report that Alan Mossman, who's in our call today, he's a co-author of this. It was a report written for National Highways in England, and it's called National Highways and IPD. And this is figure 1 in that report. So just look at that. So we have a line diagram here. At the left-hand end, we have mega projects at 2%, and in fact, it's probably less than that. And at the right-hand end, we have a group of projects here between 92 and 100%. In the middle ground, we've got US and UK averages. This is for not resident building construction, excluding residential, 30 and 40%. We've got alliances in Australia and New Zealand, and this is an average of 85 alliances built between 2010 and 2020, I think, 65%. And down here we have national highways at 35%. So the spread is extraordinary, isn't it? So some people are getting 100%. This is the Finnish Transport Infrastructure Agency on infrastructure projects, 100% of a basket of projects on time and on cost. So the thing that differentiates all of these really is just one thing: reliability. Reliability, if we want to find a magic bullet, it is reliability. It's getting reliability in behaviours, in practices, in everything. So I'm going to tell this story about 3 case studies, national highways. I'll start actually with Australian and New Zealand alliances, then national highways, and then finish off with Sutter Health. Wrong way. Okay, so alliancing. The first on-land infrastructure alliance in Australia was the Northside Sewer Tunnel Alliance, built in Sydney between 1998 and 2000. The remarkable thing about this alliance is that it built a 7-year project in 3 years, right? So get that, 3 years for a 7-year project. They actually bought the tunnel boring machines before they knew what the geotech data was. I actually was doing research on this alliance. I was an academic, and I was sitting in leadership meetings and alliance management meetings over that period of 3 years, visiting sites and so forth. So what did they do? Alliancing, and we've had 150, more than 150 alliances in Australia, infrastructure alliances. Alliances aligned commercial interests. So basically alliances are a situation where the client, and this was an Australian development really based on some alliances out of the oil and gas sector, but the client is in the tent with the major supply chain partners. And in the Sewer Alliance, there are 4 parties in the alliance. Major contractor, 2 major engineers, and the client. They make all the decisions. It's an open book arrangement. So cost is shared openly. The supply chain's cost is guaranteed to be paid with a small on cost. And so that's the process. Shared incentives, the gain share basically is the share of the profit that's there. But pain share is also sort of shared. So if it goes south, then people only get their costs plus a small on cost paid. So that's been done lots of times in Australia. It's worked very well most of the time. About 10 or 12 years after this alliance, the Sewer Alliance, Michael Ward, who's on this call, Michael and I were working together in a consultancy, and we were asked to review an 8-year program alliance of Sydney Water, basically building what they called backlog sewer schemes into outlying towns and suburbs around Sydney. It went for 8 years. And once again, the alliance was between the major partners and Sydney Water. I mean, the outcomes that they achieved are amazing because they gradually over that program showed that they could improve the major outcomes. There's a lot of innovation around the product, around the process, around communications with Sydney Water and all of that. The thing that I sort of remember very clearly was that the Sydney Water people who are in the alliance now, so they're suddenly supplying services to their former employer, they're employed by the alliance, it took them quite a while, upward of a year, to really change hats. So this is a challenge for anyone who goes into IPD or an alliance as a client. You've got to have people who can wear the hat of the service provider and focus on creating value within the alliance. And so that's a very important takeaway about alliancing an IPD. My next case study is about National Highways UK. I wrote a case study about National Highways. I visited with them when I wrote a book 10 years ago, and I've spoken at a couple of their lunch and learns. Their focus was lean, right? They wanted to implement lean, and they wanted to do it internally and with their supply chains, but they ended up mainly doing it through their supply chains. So they developed training for their suppliers, training around last planner-based planning tools, about information systems, sharing sort of visual data in information centres. But they also developed a maturity model, and it was a lean practice maturity model. So it was really saying that an organisation that is lean can measure its maturity against the matrix. And so the matrix has dimensions from strategy to leadership to quality to all sorts of things. So there are about nine areas of maturity. And so they were giving that to their suppliers so they could self-assess how mature they were on their lean journey. And it also gave them a basis for Highways England, it was called then, Highways England, to basically assess the maturity of their suppliers. Now, Highways England has reported the benefits realised, and there are some fairly big numbers there. But in the case study that I wrote, they said that for £1 invested, they got £32 back. That's a good payback by any measure. Between 2015 and 2020, they've reported that they basically, because of the lean implementation on their program, they had saved £300 million. And I just learned yesterday, the day before yesterday, we had a presentation from Highways England at the Australian and New Zealand Lean Conference, and they said that between 20 and 25, the saving was much more. It was more like $1.5 billion. So major savings reported. And yet there on that line chart that we were looking at, 35%, Just 35% of their projects finished on time and on cost. So even though they had lots of benefits, they didn't create reliability in all of the outcomes. And I was surprised at that number. Maybe Alan can comment on that later on. But what they did, they achieved they created a lot of value, but not reliability, and very significant measurable benefits. I now want to talk about Sutter. And Sutter Health is a company that I know reasonably well. That is the Cathedral Hill Hospital there on that slide. That is a $1 billion build, basically, in round terms, in San Francisco. I visited the site during the design stage and during construction as well, and spent time with them in their big room. Sutter Health started their journey I think it was about 2007. They started to look for getting better value out of their projects. And they started off by sharing the modelling that they use. So one of the things they said to their whole supply chain, we will all use the same BIM model, whatever role you have in our project. And at that time, building construction was completely sort of fragmented. Every specialism had their own software. None of them spoke to the others. I remember seeing a mechanical engineer developing 2D drawings while the fabricator had a 3D model running for their machinery. And so data was incredibly clunky. It wasn't transferable. And so they turned around and said, everyone, this is the modeling software we're going to use. We want information to flow seamlessly between everyone in the supply chain. They also said, we're going to adopt lean. We're going to support you with some lean coaching. We want the whole supply chain to adopt lean. So that was the start of their journey. And we heard just on Monday that they had a clunky start. The first few projects actually went over budget and over time. And then they started to align things commercially more effectively. That was when they adopted the IPD model. And with time, they changed the IPD model. So they made it stronger. So basically what they realized after some 7 or 8 years, that while everyone's managing their own contingency, they're not really aligned commercially. So they had a pain share, gain share model like Australian alliances. But the key issue for them, this was the game changer. They realized that while everyone's protecting their own contingency, they're actually looking after their own self-interest. So contingency and profit went into the collective basket, and that was what they all managed. And from then on, they created true alignment. So amazing outcomes. 92% of their projects out of 24 projects on time and on cost. I know them even a little better than that story, because in 2008, I think roughly, a guy called Will Lichtig, who was the in-house counsel for Sutter Health, rang me up. He said, Martin, we've been reading some of your research on safety, and we're really interested in some of the outcomes that you've published. Are you ever over this way? We'd love to meet with you. And I had a daughter living in San Francisco, so I went along. Now get this, here is Sutter Health, a healthcare company, invited me to dinner with 40 senior executives out of their whole supply chain. They were meeting every month with their supply chain leaders and working through their change management, their change initiative on how to build a better production system. Every month they met with all of those people. I was blown away. I mean, that's a hospital provider meeting with their subcontractors and fabricators. But that's the way they went about it. And so we saw on that line graph at the beginning, 92% of projects on time and on cost. So what do these 3 case studies tell us, right? They're all client-led. I mean, that's an interesting thing about that bar graph, right? The excellent projects are all client-led, right? The healthcare providers and the Finland Transport Industry Agency, they're client-led, and the clients have created a supply chain cooperative that really works. But they've done different things, and so I think it's important to recognise that. So active client leadership is the key idea, I think, because the client is in the position of allocating risk and deciding how they're going to manage risk. Commercial integration was initially brought in by Australian alliancing, but it didn't go far enough. And in fact, Michael and I wrote a report on KPIs and KRAs on alliances in Australia, at least 12 years ago, maybe a bit more. And what we found, and we compared Australian experience with American experience, what we found was that we have too much reliance on basically soft input matrix. Let me tell you a story. I was on an alliance and the leadership group was looking at their performance metrics. It was the second last day of the month. And someone popped up and said, hey, we're supposed to do 4 safety visits every month as a team, as a leadership team. How many have we done? The answer was none. Well, who can go out tomorrow and do an inspection? Now, if you've got a soft metric, which is, and that's a very soft metric, right? I mean, it can have meaning, but good behavior should be there, right? There's no point in mandating that someone should walk onto a site once a month because, you know, they'll do what I just described. And our alliances have lots of soft input metrics and not enough reliance on money saved. That is the real difference between what we see with the Finland Transport Industry Board, what we see with Sutter Health and the other healthcare providers. They share money saved. They expect good behaviour in safety and good practices in safety and quality and all of the other metrics. While we still in Australia have alliances that have soft metrics. I was actually asked to review one of the rail crossing alliances some years ago. And what I saw was reporting on KRAs and KPIs in the information room. And I didn't see much about driving continuous improvement. So it's a very important difference, right? So what Sutter Health basically did, so we've got commercial integration from alliancing in Australia, capability development, which Highways England focused on, and they achieved a lot, but they didn't really achieve the level of alignment that has been achieved with the IPDs. And what Sutter did was they developed the product delivery system. Basically, they developed a system that creates better value against all metrics. So this is the lesson for us, and this is all published. We've got to get our clients to stop seeking reliable risk management through contract because we know that there are unknown risks, there are some known risks, and disaggregating that risk management across all the players. You know, there are some projects that have 1,000 parties delivering the project. Disaggregating that, getting everyone to look after contingency and profit is never going to get you the best outcome. The clients have shown us that you've got to do is you've got to put your arms around your supply chain. You've got to create alignment of intent, and that's the best way to manage risk and get the best outcomes. And we see some builders starting to do that, right? I mean, DPR in America, I visited them 2 years ago and visited 5 of their projects with a couple of guys from Capitol in Melbourne, the Capitol Constructions. And what we saw is the sort of alignment I'm talking about. And that's what Capitol is starting to do. If you visit their website, they're very open about what they're doing. They're starting to build a supply chain that works together. Look, I had a conversation many years ago with the most senior guy in a major construction company, and he was just telling me the story that they had just been fined a very significant amount for a safety accident that shouldn't have happened. And I said to him, and he said, how can we run our project with idiots like these on our working on our sites? I said, until you understand that everyone on the site is your man, you've got to put your arms around your supply chain, you've got to have them aligned with everything that you're trying to achieve, then you'll start to get control over outcomes. But if you outsource everything and you're just brokers of services, you have no control. So I think that's the lesson that the data is giving us today. And so active client leadership, I think that has got to be one of the most powerful ways to drive the outcomes that we all want to get. Thank you.
Awesome, Martin. Awesome, Martin. if anyone's got questions, put your hand up in the chat and we'll get you unmuted and we can sort of throw some questions to Martin or the group.
Or put them into the chat.
Yeah. So I guess Martin, just touching on some of your studies there and that there, I guess my first exposure was over in the UK as well, when we actually had the client driving a better production delivery system, and that was on Heathrow Terminal 5, right? And for me, that sort of opened up my eyes around, okay, clients leading the way, right? Which is pretty much what you're trying to tell us here, right? Which would be interesting. But then I can remember jumping onto another project, and it was a highways project, and the client at the time was very inexperienced around it. And I remember we brought it in as a delivery partner to sort of to introduce it into the company. So I've seen it go both ways. What's your thoughts? I know, particularly in the Australian market, what's your thoughts around client side being experienced to be able to drive that sort of change on a project? Do you think we've got the capacity and the capabilities, or do you think we're still a way off?
Look, I think that was the challenge that I was mentioning really with that story about the Sewer Backlog Alliance. It took about a year for the people who came out of the client, and they were really capable, great engineers, to change their hat from being a superintendent to being a team player in a service providing organisation.
Mm.
And I think that that's a really important thing. I think most clients don't have the expertise. Look, there was a terrible report written about 12 years ago by the Treasury in Victoria, and they wrote a report about failed alliances, and we only have a small number, a handful of failed alliances in Australia, and they wrote a report around alliancing based on those. Now, all of those failed alliances occurred because clients thought they could outsource even their own self-interest to a consultant. And basically you can't. The clients have got to develop the maturity to represent their interests effectively. And that's not a trivial thing to do. And I think it took Sutter Health quite a while. We heard the other day about the start of their journey, and they had quite a few failed, I think 3 projects that went over budget. So it took them a while to work it out. And then it was about 7 years or so into their program that they realised that they had to take contingency and put it into the basket as well. So we are seeing the benefits of, almost 20 years of development there and what they've basically achieved. Now, the challenge for our industry to fast track adoption of this mindset is the need to start recruiting people who can capably represent the client within the delivery team. And I'd say that we don't have those people there at the moment, because basically that's not their job. They're basically public servant superintendents of contracts. And so they're really trying to represent the client's interests in that role. And stepping out of that's not that easy.
So I think my key takeaways there are we've got to do it to learn how to do it and become a learning organisation from a client perspective, right? To make it become our DNA.
Absolutely. I think that is the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat from Michael Ward saying, do you see many client organisations that recognise the role of client in active leadership?
Michael, I don't know. I haven't been close enough. I think where we've seen it go really well in Australia, and we've had a lot of great alliances. So we have had a lot, and you've worked on more of them than I have. The program alliances have been very successful because a program alliance, I was just talking to Michael about this the other night over dinner, actually, and we were talking about this, and we agreed that really in an alliance, the alliance learns to be lean, right? Because they're working for 8 years and they're continuously learning. They're in an action learning environment, working how to do it better, project by project, day by day, week by week, which is what lean is. Lean is just an organisation that's driven to continuously improve. And so, but we can see that lean by itself doesn't give you what you want. You've got to actually have that leadership so that, and it's beginning to happen in construction organisations as well slowly. I think, in fact, I just saw something this morning on the internet where David Chandler was talking about risk in major projects. And I'm seeing more and more that basically risk is best managed collectively rather than sort of sent out to individuals. But Michael, you might have a few case studies that you could share with us because you've worked on a couple of alliances.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Look, I did in quite recent years work on two transport alliances that were program alliances, and all of the things that Martin just spoke about did occur. The but again, there was a period, one more than other, that the startup was slow. It took quite an amount of time and effort to get that alignment, even within the framework of the alignment. And part of it, I think, is that we've had quite a period of time when there haven't been many alliances. And we, in a way, going back to the beginning of alliancing in Australia, where people had to learn about how to work within that operating framework. So there was definitely a learning from it. The other point I will make is that in both of the 4-year program alliances, there was a lot of innovation. Things that were improvements that were recognised during the course of the work. Many of them came from the workforce themselves, finding better ways to do things because they were doing them on a fairly repetitive basis. And there was still much more to go in terms of what was possible. The other key factor was the client leaders in all cases were really operating in the true intent of the best for the alliance and the best outcome, and they had successfully moved on from the client as the owner to the client as a participant. And again, that took time, and as because they were long-term alliances, different people rotated through, and some were more in the right mind frame to operate in that way than others. But even for those that really were not familiar and came with a different mindset, the culture had been developed to an extent where the collaborative mindset prevailed.
Yeah. So I think you touched on a couple of key points there as well, Michael, around culture, right? And I think that gets driven by leadership, correct? And then at least then we're setting projects up to succeed, right?
Yeah.
So but there's a question in the chat from Stuart saying, with Sutter Health, do they use different general contractors for IPD jobs, or do they stick with the same ones?
They have a panel, so they because they're a big client, they have lots of construction projects on foot at any time. They had a very big spend, which started in about 2007 because of that had a lot of their healthcare infrastructure had been destroyed or badly damaged by a large earthquake just before that, and suddenly the regulator said all hospitals have got to be strengthened or replaced. And so they had a huge budget to rebuild or strengthen all of their structures. But they're a very big organisation. They probably have at least half a dozen major contractors who work with them. An interesting point was they said that, for instance, early on, there were some architects who had been doing work for them. They didn't want to play in this team environment. So they parted company. So basically, they weren't comfortable in that sort of role in an alliance. They wanted to be the sort of the architect leader, and so you've got to, I guess, you end up shaking out the people who don't want to play. But no, they have quite a few service providers. But yes, they do create what I would call a sort of a cooperative approach, and you end up narrowing that down because you're not going out to market on the basis of price because you've learnt that you can get a better price. In fact, something that I didn't mention was that on the Cathedral Hill Hospital, Sutter Health set themselves a target to go 10% better than their 4 previous projects. They looked at their 4 previous similar projects, looked at pricing in the market, and they said, we want to go 10% under that. They achieved 13% under that. So not only are they creating reliability, they're actually building cheaper. Every project is becoming cheaper, and they're driving that collectively with that supply chain. But yeah, they have quite a number of different suppliers. But yes, they're never looking for a new supplier on the base of cost. It's really on the base of capability and willingness to participate in the cooperative.
Sounds good. Hopefully that's answered the question, Stuart. Alan, you got your hand up? Take yourself off mute. You're still on mute, Alan. Let me see if I can take you off mute.
It's all right. I'm off.
You're off.
Thank you. Yes, one of the things that, well, one of the members of the team that Sutter retained was one of the leading national contractors in the US. And on 2 separate projects, Sutter decided that this contractor was stepping up to, making as if it was stepping up to the line, but actually not doing that. And they sacked them twice and employed another main contractor on the project. So that's about the client managing the risk on the project effectively. You've got to be willing to sack even one of the top national companies to send the message that we're doing things differently around here.
They said to me,
I like that.
Yeah, they said to me they did that with a couple of leading architects who they had used before, and they were high name architects, but they didn't want to play in that cooperative sort of environment. And so they said, well, sorry, we won't use you anymore.
Like we often see it here in projects in Australia as well that are bleeding money, and it's like if you change that mindset to go on, okay, if that was your business and you're bleeding money, would you continue to act the same way that you're acting right now? And the answer is no. Like, why would you want to do that? So why do we accept it as this is how we do it? You know what I mean? Why can't we change? There's no reason why we can't change. There's a couple of questions in the chat as well, just so I can get through more. Ian says, do you think that an alliance framework, or that in an alliance framework, the client engaging ex-contractors into their leadership group results in a better outcome?
Sorry, I don't get what ex-contractors mean. People they've worked with previously?
Ian, if you want to take
people
yourself...
who used to work for a contractor, so have a contractor's background rather than a client or a government body background.
Well,
so look,
I think that they are 2 different worlds. I remember a young guy who had worked on an alliance that I had done some work on, and he said, I'm not going to work on alliance again. I really like the hard money contracting. It is possible. I mean, in a hard money contract, a contractor might make more money, but they carry more risk, right? And they actually capture any sort of innovation that they can bring to it and sort of release contingency and increase profit. That can be attractive. But from the client's perspective, where there's a lot of risk, some of it's known, a lot of it isn't known, they're looking for people who will be team players. I think that's the key issue, that you might have worked with that client before, that builder before, but if they're not going to be team players, as Alan just mentioned, then you have to part company with them. So you're looking for, and the other thing was, in fact, one of the things we were pursuing in that original alliance, the Sydney Sewerage Tunnel Alliance, we were looking at learning, and we visited lots of teams, and we heard from everyone who was still there. We never want to go back to hard money contracting. This is a better way of working. So there's no question that a good alliance is a life-changing experience, because you're working cooperative, you're not sort of guarding, you're not sort of fighting, you're not trying to maximize different ways of maximizing your profit or your position. You're working together for the best for project, and that can be a very rewarding environment. So, but not everyone wants to do it. So the key thing is, I think, to make sure and to have the maturity and wisdom to choose people who will play that game and who will contribute in that sort of environment.
So Ian, so what I'm taking out of what Martin's saying is basically it comes down to the individual. If they're not built for a collaborative type culture, the right culture environment sort of thing, then I don't think they'll fit So they might have the most experience in the world, but if they haven't got the right culture or the right internal mechanics to be able to fit in the team environment, then it possibly doesn't work. Needless to say, then that's the leadership team on how they can sort of get the best out of that guy as well. So
I understand that, and yes, you do need the people who've got the right cultural attitude. I've worked on 4 alliances, and the best one was where the client rep was an ex-contractor and who was still there to represent the client's interests, but understood things from a contractor's perspective and brought a very honest, open approach. And we had a real win on that job at the start, where they, as a client rep, he understood why program access, environmental approvals were important to us, and worked hard to get us those wins to kick off the project on the right foot.
So
But
I
yes,
misunderstood
if they are a true hard dollar contractor, then alliancing is not the place that you want them on either side of the fence, or either on the contractor side or the client side.
No, look, I misunderstood your question, perhaps. I think you're right that you need people who are effective at the doing and delivery of work as against a superintendent role in there. And it's a challenge for someone to change hats completely. And it makes sense that if you can get someone with the right mindset from a contracting background, they might be the best representatives for you. The other thing I didn't mention, it's important, that basically what we've seen on these program alliances, that the connection between the service providing supply chain and the client can be improved enormously because of the insight that the people who've moved across to the alliance can bring to that, and the connections they have back in the parent organisation, so that they can actually create some real wins, both for the internal systems of the client itself, but also in the way they communicate with their service providers. Look, reliability is built on trust, right? I have on this slide here with this line graph, reliability changes everything. Reliability is the cornerstone of trust. So the first step in moving towards the sorts of arrangements we're talking about is you've got to create trust. And once you have trust, then things can be improved.
Interesting. There's another question in the chat from Michael saying basically individual projects succeed, but not all. We see improvement in business plans, but not specifically an alliance type approach. How do we get the CEOs to include this in their business plan and also in their thinking?
Is that Michael Ward or another Michael?
Michael Parkinson.
Michael Parkinson's. Good day, Michael. Look, I think that's clearly a challenge in Australia because I think there is a hesitancy generally, I think, to go into alliances in the public sector, especially after that Victorian Treasury report. And that was my purpose in putting this presentation together, really, because I think we've got to give a compelling narrative to the senior people who are driving public sector agencies to understand that if they have major projects with a lot of risk in them, there's a better way to manage that than simply going to contract. And I was hoping that the sort of evidence that we're putting here into this presentation, which I've drawn quite a bit on the report that Alan Mossman wrote for highways, national highways in the UK. But the evidence that we're seeing here is really powerful. And I think adding to it that fact that Sutter is in fact driving down the cost as well as creating reliability, we've got to convince the leaders of public sector agencies, and I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. In fact, I'm sure it's a difficult thing to do, and because there's all sorts of countervailing issues there too, sort of public sector employers don't necessarily want to put their neck on the chopping block, so they might be a bit more conservative. But we've got to convince them with the evidence that we have that there's a better way to go. I'm interested on your thoughts, actually, Michael, if you have any suggestions on that, because you've been around for a while and trying to do just that.
feel free if you want to take yourself off mute, Michael, or if we're all
It's
good.
okay. I think I'm online now.
Yeah.
My thoughts. I think we just got to keep trying. At the coalface, and eventually, I guess the weight of success in the places we do it become loud enough for them to hear that, you know, it's something to be rolled out more completely. At the moment, Transport do a lot of alliance-y type things. Western Harbour Tunnel is part of it. Rosedale Interchange is part of it. There's a lot of very close relationships in the mega projects. It doesn't necessarily extend to the hundreds of $1 million projects in all instances. And it's a very individual case by case on how they get managed. So I think at the moment, I think there's the weight of evidence is still not prevalent enough at the moment to give it carriage onto the business plan specifically.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The guy who spoke from Sutter Health on Monday at our conference in Melbourne sort of used the term which we've all heard, that there was a burning platform. They were told by the building agency that they had to redo their hospitals and they had to do it fast because of the earthquake risk. In a way, the North Side Sewer Tunnel Alliance is the same, because politicians sat on their hands until 3 years before the Olympics, and then suddenly they said, oh, we can't have sewage going into the harbour when we've got sailing races on the harbour, we've got to do it. And so they had to do it in 3 years, and there's only one way to do it in 3 years. I think that also applies to the Rail Crossing Alliance in Melbourne, in that they had such a vast amount of work to be done, and it's got to be done fairly quickly. I think 130 odd rail crossings, that there's no other way to go. So I think when they're faced with no choice, then it makes the decision easier. But I think I'm waiting, and I'm going to be researching and reporting more on what's happening in Finland, and where the transport agencies are doing 100% of their projects this way. And I heard the other day that Canada is now doing all of their projects through Alliance as well. So, you know, I guess there's got to be a groundswell of information coming out of these practices to help influence leaders here.
Thank you, Martin.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions?
I have a comment. Seeing Alan's on the call from the UK, maybe Alan, a question with that. Notice is, you know, from what you're seeing in the UK, what are you generally seeing in the progression towards integrated project delivery?
You're on mute, Alan, if you're talking.
I'm not talking, but I am now. What I'm seeing is work going on in other countries in Europe. Finland, as Martin has said, but there's now a growth in this in Germany, but I'm not seeing growth in the UK. I think France is also starting. And I don't feel there are any shortcuts. Clients have to learn to do this by doing it, but they don't need to start with mega projects. It's possible to do this with smaller projects so that you build the skills. The problem is getting people, especially in government, to take the risk of managing risk rather than pushing risk out to the supply chain. This is about the client being willing to accept major cost overruns if they occur, but reducing the chances that they will occur very significantly by putting contingency and profit into a pool that gets everyone collaborating effectively together, as Martin has said.
So
I think that's an important point, that maybe the route for them is to start with smaller projects and build their confidence where the risks are smaller. I mean, I'm not saying tiny projects, not a street corner, but not $1 billion either.
Yep.
Any other questions from the group? Comments? We've got about 5 minutes to go, which probably ties us in perfectly to hand over to Michael Ward to give us a bit of a rundown around the Institute and whatnot. So over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Mick. Yeah, Michael Ward, Chair of Lean Construction ANZ. I usually wrap up our webinars. So firstly, by thanking Martin for presenting for us today, and Alan for being a special guest. And I don't know whether you're home in the UK in the middle of the night or perhaps somewhere where the time difference is a bit better. But I checked at sort of 3 or 4 in the morning there. So you're either an insomniac or very, very enthusiastic. I don't know. Look, and for everyone who's participated on the call, and Matt for organising, Mick for chairing, and Lean Construction Institute, we exist to promote knowledge and awareness of all things to do with project improvement. Lean is a generic term, but as we've seen today, it really is around the collaboration and the common alignment and the goals and sharing risk. Is known and shown to be a successful format for delivering value for the customer. So look, I encourage you, please, to remain engaged. If you're not a member, please join Lean Construction Australia, New Zealand. The more members we have, the more viable we are in going forward. Or if your organisations are able to join as corporate members, that's very beneficial for us. And we'll be having these webinars on a reasonably regular basis. We'll try what we can to get interesting speakers, provide interesting content, and please share the word with your colleagues and your friends and other interested parties to join our webinars and really try and see, if we keep chipping away, we will eventually have the CEOs engaged. If our case studies keep rolling up and we're promoting the case studies to the wider community, the decision makers will get more involved. So that's what we do. That's who we are. And my request is, please participate. And maybe you can come forward with your own case studies that we can learn from, good, bad, anything that we may be able to take some learnings from. We had a very successful Lean Construction Summit in Melbourne on Monday. A good combination of international and local speakers, public and private sector, and it was encouraging to see that the spread of the organisations that are engaged in project improvement, productivity improvement, collaboration, and so on. The papers from that summit, I believe, will be available in due course. There'll be postings on our web page. So if you'd like to get some information from there were some great presentations and a lot of learning. So that's it. I think that's a wrap up. Unless there's any other comments from anybody else, I think we'll close.
Sounds good. We started 2 minutes late and we finished 2 minutes early. Look at that.
Does that make a balance?
It's not reliable though, is it?
Okay, thanks everyone. All the best.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Good
Thank
meeting.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.